So for most of my life, I was a Protestant, and as you probably would have guessed, church history was not discussed very much. And so I've had a lot of catching up to do since I decided to become Catholic just a few months ago. So for the first 6 months or so, I would notice when I would go to Mass that a lot of churches had the same image of Mary on their walls and on their posts. And so I asked somebody, what is that image? Is that infamous or something? And they said, oh, that's Our Lady of Guadalupe. And so I went home and I did a quick Google search, ended up doing some more in-depth research, and did not anticipate that I would be as moved by this story as I was. So the setting is Mexico City during the 15th and 16th centuries. And at that time, the native peoples of the area were being conquered by the Aztecs and later the Spanish conquistadors. Now, the Aztecs had this tradition where they would sacrifice any conquered peoples to their snake god, Quetzalcoatl. And so by the Aztecs' own accounts, they killed about 250,000 people per year. In one documented instance, they killed about 80,000 in a 4-day span when they were dedicating their new temple. So missionaries traveled from all over the world to try to convert these Aztecs. There were Franciscan, Dominican, and Augustinian friars. But their efforts were almost completely ineffective because the Aztec religion was strongly characterized by terror of God, terror of their snake god Quetzalcoatl, until about 1531, when this guy Juan Diego, who was just a poor, old 57-year-old man, old by those days' standards, was just traveling about and experienced an apparition from the Blessed Virgin Mary. So the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared to him and told him that she wanted a church to be built on that spot in Tepeyac. So Juan went to the bishop and he told the bishop that he had this experience with Mary and that she wanted the church to be built on this spot. And the bishop was just a little bit skeptical. You know, it probably wasn't uncommon for people to come to the bishop making requests, saying that they had apparitions. So Juan leaves and has yet another apparition from Mary. And Mary fills his overcoat with these roses that aren't even in season. It's the middle of winter. And she fills his coat with these roses that couldn't have grown, that he couldn't have picked. So Juan rushes these roses to the bishop. And as he's giving these roses to the bishop, they see that there is an image of the Blessed Virgin Mary on his overcoat. If you fast forward to today, that image is still hanging in the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico City. So the image appeared on his overcoat, which was made of cactus fiber, which is expected to last for about 50 years if it's preserved in the proper conditions, and it's lasted for half a millennia. So as you might expect, the bishop decided to build the church after these miraculous signs, and as a result, over 9 million native peoples gave their life to Christ and converted to Catholicism. So man, what an amazing story. I mean, there's so much to take away. You know, sometimes in modern times, it's so easy to think that the Great Commission is void. Because if you look back throughout history, unless you were part of a society that was the dominant militaristic presence at that time, you had to believe in a God. And even most of the nations that were dominant believed in some type of God. But if you weren't in control, then you essentially had no hope. You were a sitting duck waiting to be conquered, much like the native peoples before the Aztecs and the Spanish conquistadors. You were just waiting to be conquered. And so your only hope was that a God would save you. You know, there wasn't as much access to information. And so if the people didn't have access to the gospel, if they didn't have access to know about Christ, then they would just make their own God up. And you know, some of them made up gods that were greedy. Some of them made up gods that were apathetic, that reflected whatever characteristic they wanted them to reflect. But you had to believe in some type of God because otherwise you had no hope. And so, you know, as Americans, we're living in a very anomalous time in history. You know, it really makes visible the truth of the words of Jesus when he said it's hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. We live in so much wealth and so much excess that it's actually more convenient for us to not believe in a God because we feel like we don't need him. And we're such glass half empty people. I mean, we always complain about the 1% in America because we're always looking up. But if you make more than 81,000 US dollars a year, you're in the top 1% of the world. And if you make more than 43,000 US dollars per year, you're in the top 10% of the world. And so in a way, our position can kind of feel similar to those friars that were in New Spain all the way back then trying to convert the Aztecs. Not because of the manslaughter, because of the persecution, but because there's a similar predisposition against God. And it's not a predisposition because of a terror of God. It's a predisposition because of an inconvenience, but a predisposition nonetheless. So there's this difficulty to convert people. There's this difficulty to see souls come to Christ. And I know a lot of times it can feel hopeless. It's like, God, why me? Why was I born in this time? Why was I not born in a time that my efforts would have yielded more fruit? But you know, God doesn't make mistakes, and that's evident in this story. And as it turns out, historically, spreading the gospel hasn't always been the easiest task. I mean, look at the disciples. You know, they didn't have any militaristic power. They weren't even threatening people with violence. They didn't condone violence. All they had was their words. But their words held enough power that the leaders at that time were willing to go to whatever extent they had to go to take away the only weapon that they had, which was their voice. And you could say, oh, well, they would have done the same for any heretic. But I don't think that's true, because why go to the trouble? Why kill them if you can just call them crazy? You know, if what they're saying really holds no truth, if it really has no power, then what's the point of even wasting your breath? But they killed them because their words did have power. So yeah, as difficult and inconvenient as it is for me to say, I don't think our position is hopeless. And you know, I don't think it's coincidence that we were born in this time. I don't think it's happenstance that any of us are alive today. I think that if God was done working, then time would cease to exist. So there's a reason that we're alive, and there's a reason that we were born today, and we have to believe that God didn't just have an express intention in creating us. He had an express intention in creating us today. He had an express intention for us to be alive in 2025. There's so much to be learned from Juan Diego. You know, he was a 57-year-old man, and I don't know what the average life expectancy was back then, but it couldn't have been more than 65. You know, he's really taking the buzzer beater here. You know, he's in the last few, he takes a full court shot, and he absolutely sinks it. And Juan Diego was a poor man. He had nothing, probably had no stature. He was able to accomplish something that men with much more stature, with much more youth, with much more resources, wasn't able to accomplish. Even in the last years of his life, he had his ear open to God. He had faith that God would use him, that he was alive for a reason. So Juan Diego is proof that the prayers of a righteous man availeth much. I mean, in this case, the thing that it availed was millions of souls to Christ. You know, they say that you can't leave anything behind on this earth, that you can't really leave a legacy, but I don't think that's true. My ancestors, many of them were Catholic. I couldn't name any of them beyond my great-great-grandfather. Even him, all I know about him is his name. But it would be foolish of me to think that many of my ancestors didn't fervently pray, and that their fervent prayers didn't have a huge impact on the way that God has kept me in my life and guided me throughout my trials. You know, I think for the better or the worse, everyone has a legacy. It's just that your legacy won't be attached to your name. Sure, maybe no one will know who you are, but after we leave this place, our prayers and our intentions and the things that we've consecrated to God, they live much longer than we do, whether or not our image or our likeness or our reputation is attached to them. So I hope this has helped you to find some inspiration. I know it's certainly inspired me. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like and subscribe for more content like this.